When the Philadelphia Eagles play the Dallas Cowboys, Walt Anderson shouldn't be the referee of the game. He grew up in Texas, so he has to be a Cowboys fan. It'll make the game unfair. Because he is from Texas, he has motivation to make rulings that favor the Cowboys and hurt the Eagles' chances of winning the game. That is an example of appeal to motive, or ad hominem, which can be defined as a pattern of argument which consists in challenging a thesis by calling into question the motives of its proposer. This typically means that the motives of the author of an argument are called into question when compared to the credibility of the argument or the potential bias that may be included. We all, at some point during our time at Rider and possibly after that, will do some form of research. When we do research, it is important to actually read a source before determining if there is any bias. You should not simply read the thesis or argument of a piece, look at the author's appearance or biography, and automatically assume that the piece is biased, because even if the author has some motivation in the topic they're writing about, they still had to have done a little extensive research on the topic and at the least have gotten their work peer-reviewed. Appeal to motive is a logical fallacy because it allows for the inclusion of one's own bias as a reader, base their opinions off of their own beliefs on the subject and or the author. The discrediting of a writer's work as an argument is often dismissed when one disagrees with the beliefs of the author, and the attacking of a person and not their work is if the arguer has no support for their own beliefs. To begin this speech, I will first talk about the importance of inclusion of personal bias and why it has an effect on the way one reads a source. Part of the reason for why appeal to motive is a logical fallacy is because it sometimes allows for readers to include their own personal bias on the author of the works or argument, the argument itself, and or overall beliefs of the source that the argument is written in. As soon as you accuse a writer of committing a motive-based fallacy, you yourself are committing one and showing your own personal bias against the legitimacy of the argument presented. Even if the author of a written work is legitimately posing an argument, accusing them of committing a motive-based fallacy shows that you, the reader, do not see the legitimacy of their argument, and it causes you to make the same fallacy that you believe the author made. Similarly, appealing to motive is typically a way for an individual to distance themselves from the beliefs of an individual that they feel is undesirable, even if the argument being made is being proposed legitimately, thus showing individual bias against the proposer of the argument. A reader might appeal to motive simply because they do not like the author of the originally proposed argument and or their beliefs. This is an example of how appealing to motive allows for the inclusion of one's own personal bias, as they claim that there is no legitimacy to an author's argument simply because they disagree with their beliefs on a specific topic, other topics, and or with them as a person. This can lead to the discrediting of an author's work, which is another issue with appealing to motive. Appealing to motive often opens the author of the originally proposed argument from their readers. This comes as a result of attention being directed away from the merits of the argument that a writer is legitimately trying to offer in their work. Once you as a reader attempt to appeal to motive, you take the attention away from the argument that may have legitimately been offered and redirect the attention to the motives of the author and any potential bias they may have on the topic of their work. It is important when reading a piece of writing to keep your focus on the merits or legitimacy of the proposed argument rather than the motive-based fallacy and further discrediting that author's efforts to publishing the piece of writing in question. Similarly, the mistake is often made when an argument is immediately dismissed when it appeals to the presumed or known beliefs of its source, but this mistake then discredits the source because the source may be relevant to the legitimacy of the beliefs. This deals more with the source from which the written work was published. If the reader disagrees with the beliefs that a source is perceived to have and they prematurely dismiss the validity of the argument of a piece of writing on that source, they turn in discredit that source even if the argument of the written work as well as the beliefs of the source overall, even if both are completely legitimate. In addition to the inclusion of personal bias in discrediting someone's work, attacking the person rather than their work is another problem that arises when one tries to appeal to motive. Finally, when a reader attempts to appeal to motive in regards to a written work, they almost always end up attacking the author rather than the work itself. These attacks tend to take a personal angle, whether intentionally or unintentionally, since the reason for these attacks often stem from a place of ignorance. Appealing to motive is an example of what is known as an ad hominem fallacy, where the individual making the argument is personally attacked based on their gender, race, ethnicity, class, presumed intelligence, etc., which is typically a diversion tactic when the person against the proposed argument does not have enough information, evidence, or proof to support their view. When a reader appeals to motive or commits any ad hominem fallacy, it is typically a diversion tactic because they have little to no evidence to support their own view against the original argument. This can oftentimes stem from a place of embarrassment as the individual against the originally proposed argument may feel self-conscious about their intelligence if they disagree with the original argument, but are not entirely sure when they disagree with the argument. All in all, these points are just some of the reasons why appeal to motive should not be used, as it leads to several other issues that lessen an individual's ability to benefit from their reading of a specific written work. In conclusion, appeal to motive is a logical fallacy because it allows for the inclusion of one's own bias as a reader bases their opinions off of their own beliefs on the subject and or the author. Discrediting of a writer's work as an argument is often dismissed when one disagrees with the beliefs of the author, and the attacking of a person and not their work if the arguer has no support for their own beliefs. These issues arise simply because there's a difference of opinion between the writer and the reader. When one appeals to motive, they are frequently prone to committing the same logical fallacy that they believe the author of a written work is making. One should not look to commit a fallacy of any kind, as they are based on invalid or faulty reasoning as well as unsound arguments. These properties lead to written works that are illegitimate, poorly written, and simply incorrect, and therefore unbelievable.